At a time when cities are desperately in need for investment in transit, roads, and water system, this Conservative removed $2 billion from their infrastructure budget. How do the Conservatives justify these nasty cuts?
Mr. Speaker, the member should know, just as the FCM does, that this is a case of responsible accounting, only that, and does not indicate a cut to any infrastructure programs.
That's a bit of an exchange in the House of Commons today over how much money the government spent, or in this case didn't spend, this past fiscal year. According to public accounts published earlier this week, the feds spent about $8 billion less than expected. Should the government have freed up some of that money to be spent on infrastructure at a time when towns and cities are saying they need a lot more cash for things like roads and bridges and other infrastructure? Is the government cutting programs and not telling Canadians, or is this good fiscal management? We're going to get a debate going. Pierre Poilievre is just jumping into the seat right now. He'll join us in a second. He's the Parliamentary Secretary to the Transport Minister, but already there, Peggy Nash, the NDP's finance critic, and Jeff Regan, the Liberal industry critic. Thanks for all of you. Pierre Poilievre is not here. How did you arrive at this figure, Peggy Nash, $2 billion being cut from infrastructure?
Well, as you just said, this information came through public accounts, and it's information that we've been trying to get to find out the impact of budget cuts so that we know exactly what programs and services are being cut. The government originally denied there were any cuts to programs and services, and here we have a situation where we have a massive infrastructure deficit in this country. We have the Gardiner Expressway in Toronto, in my own riding, dropping chunks of concrete on the road below. We have people very concerned about a risk to their water supply. We have gridlock in many of our major cities because of lack of transit investment. And, you know, at a time when interest rates are so low, it's the perfect time to invest in infrastructure. The money had already been earmarked. It's a way to keep people working or put people to work for a desperately needed expenditure. So it is inexplicable why the government would chop $2 billion from planned spending on infrastructure when the need is so desperate right across the country.
All right, let's get Pierre Poilievre in here. Mr. Poilievre, has the government quietly cut $2 billion that was approved in 2011 budget, as the opposition is charging, at a time when many cities are literally starving for cash?
No, not at all, and that's why the Canadian Federation of Municipalities corrected the record on the matter. The federal government sends money for projects when we receive the bills. Those bills don't come until the construction happens. Often, in fact almost always in a fiscal year, there are projects across this country that are delayed because of weather, logistical problems, a whole series of factors. And when those delays occur, there's a delay in the receipt of an invoice by the federal government from the municipality, and therefore a delay in the spending. When the projects are delayed, so too is the spending. So this does not represent a cut. And the money simply will be paid out when we receive invoices.
All right, so you're saying, and we have a comment, let me just show you the quote so everyone's aware of this from the Canadian Municipalities, the Federation. Here's what they said, quote, "We're confident the federal government is continuing to follow through on all of its infrastructure commitments, and that any discrepancy in the numbers reflects changes in the timing of the Fed payments, not a change in its promise to invest." Jeff Regan, what do you make of that?
Well, in fact, as I see it, let's be honest, in fact, some of this money has lapsed, some of it hasn't. So they're partly right, and what each of my colleagues is saying is partly right. But the fact of the matter is, when you consider that the government allocated, had a 5-year, $1 billion fund for green infrastructure, and in the first year, you'd think that would be about $200 million a year. In the first year, they managed to only spend $66 million. So that was coming out like they were using an eyedropper, whereas when it comes to the money that they diverted for Tony Clement, the money that was targeted supposedly for border infrastructure and used instead for gazebos and sidewalks in his riding, they managed to get that out very quickly as if they were using a fire hose. So you have two very different situations there. And now we have the Conference Board of Canada telling us that one of the reasons that our economic recovery has been so slow is a slowdown and a reduction in infrastructure spending. So it does seem like the government hasn't made the efforts it really could make if you compare the slowness of this spending to what they did in Tony Clement's riding.
All right. Pierre Poilievre, what's your take on this? Is it slow funding? Is it diversion? I mean, how are people to distinguish between what's actually cost-cutting and what's just late funding that eventually will come and what's actually not going to come?
Well, there are savings in our economic plan. They amount to roughly just under $6 billion a year if you consider both the savings to in bureaucracy and also savings in the MP and public service pension plans. That's one thing. What we're talking about on this panel is simply money that will have to be spent in a later year when the bill actually comes in for the projects in question. What Ms. Nash and the NDP are proposing is that we pay bills that we haven't actually received. And that's the kind of irresponsible fiscal management that the Canadian people have rejected. When we receive a bill for a project that we are supporting, then we honor the bill. But if the bill hasn't come in because the project is delayed, we can't pay the bill. That's just how the system works.
So, Peggy Nash, given what the municipalities are saying, does the NDP have to get their calculator out again?
Well, Evan, this is exactly the kind of lack of transparency that we've been talking about. It's the parliamentary budget officer can't get hold of information. The members of parliament can't get hold of information. And so it's nice for my colleague here to say, well, there will be bills coming in the future.
No, but the Federation of Canadian Municipalities are saying that as well.
Well, it'll be interesting to see when the accounting is done, and we'll find out ultimately years from now when the Auditor General does his review. But all I know is there is gridlock to the tune of billions of dollars of loss of productivity in major communities across this country. There are hundreds of communities that have to boil their water because they don't have potable water. And we see chunks of concrete falling from major bridges and expressways across the country. If this government is sitting, because this government is sitting on billions of dollars of cuts, including to infrastructure funding, it is nonsensical that we are not making these investments in infrastructure at a time when interest rates are at a rock-bottom level and where we have a massive deficit of joblessness in this country. We could be putting people to work, investing in the kind of infrastructure that Canadians so desperately want, rather than letting billions of dollars sit unused in our accounts, and we can't get the detailed information to find out, are there bills that are unpaid? Who knows? We can't find out.
One of the problems, Evan, is that usually in the spring, the Treasury Board Minister tables the departmental performance reports, which allow us to examine the purpose of various money, what it's planning to do with it, and what it has been doing with it. Well, that wasn't done this year. So while we have the raw numbers, we don't have the explanation for that. And that creates a problem not only for members of Parliament, also for journalists, for you, like you, pardon me, and for other people who are following this sort of thing. That's not transparent. Meanwhile, the Conservatives, I guess maybe this was to claim good management or something, they created a slush fund of $750 million and then didn't spend any of it. And they're claiming that's an example. That's an example of good management, they're saying. Now, if I were to manage my household finances that way and say, well, I'm much better off because I set aside this money, or I planned to spend all this money and didn't, I think you'd laugh at me.
Evan? I can't believe we're actually hearing these words from the opposition. We've got a Liberal member here who's attacking us because he says we're not spending a slush fund quickly enough. We have, and those are his words. Those are his words. Then we have an NDP member who says that we should be paying bills that we haven't actually received.
And we should be investing in infrastructure.
I didn't interrupt you. She says we should be paying bills that we haven't actually received.
Don't put words in my mouth.
And then they're both saying that we are hiding information that both of them have read in the public accounts. One of the reasons why the public accounts are so aptly named is because They're public. And that's why we're talking about
but
them
Mr.
right here
I got to leave this
on
go.
your
But
show.
the truth is, and John Iveson wrote about this in the National Post. I mean, it was in public accounts, but I mean, this is billions of dollars that Canadians really didn't have any idea weren't being spent. Given the fact, though, that it's slowly going out the door. At one point during the Economic Action Plan after 2011, the stimulus, the government touted how quickly the money is getting out the door. Why is it taking so long to get billions of dollars to cities that desperately need infrastructure?
Well, most of the immediate demands of the municipalities were satiated through the Economic Action Plan.
Fake lakes and gazebos.
And that's why...
Built right away.
And that is why we are not seeing the same demands for new spending projects from the municipalities.
Transit,
they have to match
water.
the money that we spend, and therefore we can't spend it faster than they ask for it. We can't send the money faster than we receive a bill. On the results we speak of, the best national measurement for the state of our infrastructure is the average age of a piece of infrastructure in this country. In 2000, the average age of a piece of infrastructure in this country was 17 years old. Today, it's 14. It's at its lowest level. Our infrastructure is newer than at any point since the 1970s. Those are results.
These guys
are crumbling.
They're able to spend money on the Economic Action Plan advertising, $50 million this year in a big hurry. What are they doing? They're advertising the money they aren't spending?
All right, I'm going to leave it here. I mean, it's an interesting debate because, Canadians, obviously, there's a lot of money at stake here, and the question is, where is it being spent, or if it's being spent, or should it be spent? Pierre Poilievre, Peggy Nash, Jeff Regan, I appreciate your time on this one today. Thanks.
Thanks, Evan.
Thank you.